The end of my Friday night shift at a bustling downtown bar in Boise, Idaho, was always a mix of exhaustion and excitement. Glancing at my watch, I saw that it was well past midnight, and I was eager to count up my tips from the night's work. As always, there were rowdy and drunken customers causing commotion with fights breaking out for no apparent reason other than excess alcohol. It was a regular occurrence on Fridays, and tonight was no exception. Finishing up my duties and saying goodbye to my coworkers, I stepped out into the cool night air. Every week, Ollie, the bartender, would give me a ride home, but this time he had gone home sick halfway through his shift with a fever and body aches. In a rare turn of events, I decided to walk home on the relatively warm and dry night. It shouldn't take me more than 30 minutes to get back to my apartment anyways. As I exited through the back door and headed down the alley, I carefully maneuvered around two familiar customers who had passed out on the sidewalk from too much booze. This was just another typical night at the bar I worked at. However, as I turned left onto the street, I heard a noise behind me. Pausing for a moment, I looked back into the darkness of the alleyway and saw a man and a woman engaged in a heated argument. The once quiet alleyway was now filled with their voices echoing off the walls, creating an eerie atmosphere. The loud, heated voices from the open window of the opposite apartment block cut through the quiet night like a knife. I could hear every detail of the argument, making it clear that everyone in the area could also hear it. The tension in the air was palpable as I made my way down the slick, rain-covered sidewalk. My mind raced as I debated whether to call an Uber or a taxi. Flashes of my last taxi ride flooded my memory, the driver's leering eyes and rude comments about my party outfit. The thought of another uncomfortable encounter made me hesitate. Suddenly, a large man stumbled towards me, his unsteady gait causing him to lurch towards me. I instinctively stepped to the side to avoid him, but he changed direction and approached me. His disheveled appearance and overpowering smell of alcohol made me uneasy. "Sorry to bother you," he slurred, "but can you spare some change?" I replied that I didn't have any and tried to sidestep him and continue on my way. But as I walked, I couldn't shake off the encounter. To distract myself, I started looking at shop windows as I passed by, trying to focus on something else. It wasn't unusual for strange things to happen late at night in this city, so I wasn't too concerned, but I stayed alert, nonetheless, acutely aware of my surroundings. As I stood, entranced by the sparkling jewels in the shop window, a sudden movement caught my eye. In the reflection, a man wearing a worn baseball hat appeared, his features obscured by shadow. But when I turned to look for him on the crowded sidewalk, he was nowhere to be seen. Shaking off the strange encounter, I continued on my way home. However, as I paused to admire some flowers in a nearby shop window, the same man once again appeared in the reflection. This time, his hat was pulled down low, and he seemed tall and stocky, his presence looming over me like a dark cloud. Feeling uneasy, I quickly turned left, hoping to lose him in the bustling city streets. But as I made my way down unfamiliar alleys and dimly lit side roads, I couldn't shake off the feeling of being watched. My heart raced and my palms grew clammy as I heard footsteps approaching rapidly from the other side of the road. Fear clawed at my chest as I realized that this unknown route may not lead me home after all. The streets were now dark and deserted, with only the occasional flicker of a street lamp providing any semblance of light. Panic rising within me, I quickened my pace until a voice across the street shattered the silence with its chilling words, "There's no use in trying to run, lady." As I heard the approaching footsteps, I knew my only option was to run. Without hesitation, I sprinted down the road, desperately looking for someone who could help me. It wasn't long before I heard the sounds of someone following behind me on the same sidewalk. In a split-second decision, I took a sharp right turn onto another street, hoping to lose my pursuer. But as I rounded the corner of a house and onto yet another unknown road, I realized that I was no longer heading towards home. The right turn had been a blind bend, and with the house wall blocking my view, I had no idea what lay ahead. As I continued to look over my shoulder in fear, I suddenly collided with a solid object and fell to the ground. When I looked up, I saw an elderly man standing before me, wearing a hat, gloves, three-piece suit, and large boots. He looked eccentric and wild, but in that moment, I couldn't tell if he was part of this whole ordeal or not. He seemed just as startled and scared as I was. Slowly, I got to my feet, feeling defeated and starting to cry. Just when I thought it was all over, the footsteps behind me stopped and were replaced by a heavy breathing just inches away from me. Then, the elderly man spoke up and asked if the person chasing me was with me. It was then that he realized what had happened, and that I had been running away in fear. My lungs burned, and my heart raced as I ran, my feet pounding against the pavement in a desperate attempt to escape. The man behind me was gaining ground, his heavy breaths echoing mine. I knew I couldn't outrun him for long, and panic set in as I searched for a way out of this nightmare. Without saying a word, I made eye contact with a man nearby, silently pleading for help. My wide eyes and dilated pupils must have conveyed the terror I was feeling. In that moment, the old man understood and reached out to grab my hand. His reassuring grip gave me a sense of safety and trust, and he led me around the side of the house, following the same path I had just come from. As we walked, I could feel the man in pursuit staring at us from across the road, his cap pulled low over his face. But then, just like that, he disappeared into the distance, and I breathed a sigh of relief. I was grateful to be safe thanks to this stranger. Someone's granddad, someone's hero, and mine. The fear and adrenaline began to fade as we made our way back to safety, but the image of his menacing face would haunt me for days to come. The icy tendrils of the night air wrapped tightly around me, seeping into my skin and chilling me to the bone. Each step I took felt like trudging through a slushy, snow-covered path. The coldness was almost suffocating, and I regretted not grabbing a jacket before leaving my warm house. But then again, tonight seemed to be filled with one regrettable decision after another. Attending the party where my ex would be flaunting their new love interest was probably not the best idea. And indulging in one too many drinks had only made things worse. Now I found myself walking alone on deserted city streets in the early hours of a holiday. Most people were probably sound asleep in their cozy beds while I tried to escape from work-related stress. The night was eerily quiet, save for the faint sound of my footsteps crunching on the pavement beneath me. The mist from my breath created a ghostly aura around me as I trudged forward, trying to focus on the path ahead. My unsteady steps occasionally caused me to stumble, but I managed to stay upright, determined to keep moving forward. As I walked, the silence became a welcome relief from the loudness of the party. However, it also amplified the sounds of neglect and abandonment in this part of town. Most of the street lamps were dim or completely non-functional due to lack of maintenance. The few that did emit light were weak and barely illuminated the path in front of me. One particular lamp flickered wildly as if fighting for its last breath. Frustration bubbled up inside me as I let out a deep sigh. But I couldn't afford to stop now. Every step brought me closer to home and away from this lonely, desolate place. At first, I brushed off the issue as a minor inconvenience. But as I neared the source of the problem, my vision began to blur and darken with splotches. The flickering lamp, once a helpful guide in the dark, had now become an enemy to my eyesight. It could have been the effects of the alcohol I had consumed earlier, or perhaps a combination of both that made me stumble and catch myself on the edge of a nearby bridge. My head spun wildly for a moment, before finally finding its bearings. However, even when I thought I had regained my balance, the unforgiving twigs poking at my skin proved otherwise. Despite my best efforts, I could not stand up straight and ended up stumbling further into the thick undergrowth. Against my better judgment, I resigned to lying there and resting for a moment, hoping that time would bring back stability to my feet. But even with my eyes closed, a sharp rock pressed against my back served as a constant reminder of my current situation. Suddenly, like an earthquake shattering the dead silence of the night, loud noises echoed through the air. My mind, still foggy from sleep, struggled to make sense of what was happening. And then it hit me, the sound of heavy breathing and people fighting. From what I could gather in the darkness caused by the now defunct lamp, there were probably 2 or 3 individuals involved in this struggle, helpless and immobilized, All I could do was lay there and listen as everything felt surreal. Was I truly awake, or just lost in a dream? The world was a chaotic blur as my alcohol-addled brain struggled to make sense of the frenzy happening around me. The sounds of a violent scuffle erupted nearby, but I was too weak and disoriented to get up and see what was happening. Dirt flew into the air, kicked up by thrashing limbs and broken twigs, creating a maelstrom of noise. Fear gripped me tightly, as if it had latched onto my soul with razor-sharp claws determined to never let go. Every instinct told me not to move, or else I would meet my demise in this unknown battle. Despite squinting hard, I could only make out dark silhouettes moving at lightning speed, their features shrouded in the darkness of the night. Suddenly, there was a final thud, signaling the end of the struggle. All that remained was the sound of heavy breathing, reminiscent of a giant rhino taking deep, drawn-out breaths after a long sprint. It reminded me of a boring documentary about a modern-day blacksmith and the haunting sound of the bellows blowing air into the fiery furnace. But now, lying there motionless in this unfamiliar park, it felt 10 times worse. As peace slowly returned to the park, I heard the trees rustling and twigs crunching under someone's shoes. My heart raced with panic as I realized they were approaching me. The footsteps grew closer until all I could hear was their unusually loud breathing, each inhale and exhale sending shivers down my spine. My mind raced with fear as I awaited my fate in this unknown territory. A heavy presence loomed over me, a dark figure dominating my space and scrutinizing every move I made. My heart pounded with such force against my chest, I feared it would burst through my ribcage. With bated breath, I lay frozen in fear as the figure drew closer, their hot breath ghosting across my face. Goosebumps erupted all over my skin as terror consumed me. He stood there, silent and menacing, studying me with cold, soulless eyes. It felt like an eternity passed as he just stared at me, his intentions unknown. But I knew one thing for sure. These men were like savage animals, driven by their base instincts to hurt and destroy. I dared not make a sound or even the slightest movement, knowing that it could be my undoing. A million questions raced through my mind, each more terrifying than the last. Would he kill me now? How would he do it? Would I ever see my mother again? In that moment of utter desperation, I found myself praying, something I had not done in years. I wasn't a religious person, but in that moment, all I could do was reach out for some semblance of hope. It dawned on me then how arrogant and self-sufficient I had been before. But now, lying helpless and vulnerable in the darkness of the park, all I needed was someone to save me. Finally, the man grunted and walked away into the distance, his footsteps fading into the night as he returned to wherever he came from. Relief washed over me in waves as I realized that I had survived another encounter with these dangerous men. But deep down, I knew it was only a matter of time before their violence caught up to me once again. My body was heavy and unresponsive, as if I had been submerged in water for too long. My limbs were numb, and it took a while for me to realize that they were under my control again. With great effort, I rolled onto my side and slowly got up on my hands and knees, my vision still spinning like a carousel gone mad. After a few sways, I managed to stand up straight, feeling lightheaded and disoriented. I stumbled back onto the path and began to move as fast as I could towards home, my mind clouded with fear and confusion. The temperature had dropped significantly since I left for the party, making it even colder now. The icy wind whipped against my skin, adding to the chill that already enveloped me. I hurried along, my heart pounding in my chest, afraid that the man might come back. I didn't want to be his next victim. Luckily, I made it home without encountering any other danger. But even though I locked the doors behind me, I couldn't shake off the unease and paranoia that consumed me, the feeling only worsened by the beginnings of a nasty hangover setting in. My head throbbed and my stomach churned as the effects of the alcohol mingled with the fear coursing through my veins. My hands were shaking uncontrollably, and nothing seemed to calm them down. It wasn't until later that I realized I was in shock, vulnerable and exposed, even within the safety of my own home. As if sensing my vulnerability, fear crept up on me once again when Desmond's voice echoed through the quiet house. Was he back to finish what he started? Panic washed over me as I scanned the room frantically for somewhere to hide. "Desmond, are you there? Open up!" The familiar voice called out, slowly bringing me out of my terror-induced fog and back into reality. Relief flooded over me as I realized it was just my friend, Desmond, trying to check up on me. But the harrowing events of the night left me trembling and shaken, unable to fully calm down even in the safety of my own home. My voice came out weak and hoarse, barely audible. I wasn't sure if they had heard me when I said hello. For a moment, I feared that I would have to repeat myself. "Desmond," she called out gently. Slowly, I unfolded myself from the fetal position and hobbled my way to the door. As I opened it, I noticed the bright sunlight streaming in through the windows. It was well into the morning, but somehow I hadn't even noticed. Opening the door took longer than usual, and as I stepped out into the hallway, it became clear why. Last night, in a fit of panic, I had locked down everything possible. My sister stood before me with a look of terror on her face. Her hair was disheveled, and there were dark circles under her eyes. She blinked in surprise at me and asked, "Where have you been? You've been gone for 2 days now." To this day, I can't recall exactly what happened during those 2 days. I tried talking to the police about my disappearance, but it ultimately led nowhere. No one had reported me missing in the area, and there were no bodies found in the park where I had supposedly disappeared. It was the scariest experience of my life,